In the 20th century, the average IQ in most countries was steadily increasing by about 3 points per decade. This phenomenon was named after a researcher, James Flynn. He showed that from roughly the early 1900s to the 1990s, each new generation constantly scored higher on standard IQ tests than the previous one. For a while, it looked like humanity was literally becoming smarter and smarter. This phenomenon became known as the Flynn effect. So why was this happening? Researchers usually point to several major factors: improvements in education, a more intellectually complex environment, urbanization, the decline of child labor, better nutrition, and the development of abstract thinking. The world was becoming more complex, information was expanding rapidly, and the human brain was essentially being trained to deal with abstract concepts. But there is a very interesting twist. Starting around the late 1990s and early 2000s, researchers in several countries began noticing something unexpected. Average IQ scores stopped rising, and in some places they actually started to decline. This phenomenon is now called the reverse Flynn effect. The strongest evidence has been observed in countries such as Norway, Denmark, Finland, France, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands. One of the most convincing data sets comes from Norway, where hundreds of thousands of men have taken mandatory cognitive tests as part of military conscription over many decades. And here is what a 2018 study found. An average IQ scores declined by about 7 points per generation. But the most interesting part of the study is this: the effect doesn't appear to be genetic. When researchers compared brothers within the same family, they found that younger brothers often scored lower than the older brothers on the same cognitive tests. And genetically, they're essentially the same, which means the explanation is environmental, not biological. And this is where the discussion gets really interesting. Hi everyone, my name is Elina. I'm really happy to see you here on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe and also hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. And I'll leave a link to my Instagram in the description if you want to connect there as well. Today I want to talk about generational theory and about why in recent years people have increasingly started saying that some kind of decline supposedly began with Generation Z. But is that actually true? I'm pretty sure most of you have already heard about generational theory, but let's quickly go over what it actually means. There is a concept that was popularized by William Strauss and Neil Hauer in their book The Fourth Turning. They proposed the idea that history develops in cycles. Roughly every 20 years, a new generation is born with its own worldview, values, and way of seeing the world. And about every 80 years, society goes through a major crisis that fundamentally reshapes it. These cycles influence how different generations are formed, how they think, what they value, and how they respond to the world around them. In this video, we will focus on Gen Z. Girls, we usually start thinking about getting in shape in the spring. Often we hit the ground running and put in a lot of effort, but eventually we burn out and don't get the results we want. To help us achieve our goals effectively and stress-free, thousands of women choose the Return to Training Mode program on the Wispence platform every spring, and also use ready-made meal plans with calculated calories, where food is a pleasure, not a restriction, meditations to calm anxiety and stress and find balance, convenient analytics that show real progress and inspire you to keep going. To help you get started, the Wispence team has prepared spring discounts of up to 70% for you. This is the perfect time to invest in yourself. Follow the link in the description and take action now. Generation Z refers to those born between 1997 and 2012. For many of them, a smartphone existed even before they started school. They grew up in a world where information is instant and unlimited. And because of that, they often trust their own judgment more than traditional systems. Some of their defining traits include speed, flexibility, emotional openness. They tend to look at older rules and think, If this doesn't work anymore, why are we still doing it? To older generations, they can sometimes seem superficial or impatient, but in reality, it's simply a different strategy for adapting to an extremely fast-changing world. But here is a very important point. Generational theory isn't a 100% scientifically proven concept. Sure, it's widely used in media, marketing, and sociology, but science doesn't confirm that everyone in generation shared the same psychological traits. Hundreds of factors shape a person: culture, family, education, economic environment, personal experiences. So the formula born in this year equal this personality doesn't really work. Some people are ahead of their time, while others think more conservatively. Many combine traits from multiple generations. The key takeaway: every person is an individual. Generational theory is just a tool to understand societal trends, not a label for every single person. Now, why did I even get interested in this topic? I randomly saw a post on Threads one day, and honestly I had never seen so many jokes about Gen Z in one place. That's when I thought differences between generations could actually make a fun and insightful video. Here is a snippet from that post written by someone from Gen Z. Millennials learned the word Zoomers and now they're just making lame jokes about it. Now we're gonna turn off your internet. Sorry Zoomers, but I have some comments I just have to share. For example, 3 Zoomers went to turn off a millennial's internet. One had a panic attack from a neighbor saying hi. The second fell into apathy because there weren't enough viewers on the stream. And the third one had ADHD and just didn't make it. Or another one. Zoomers went to turn off the internet for millennials, but burnout on the way. Of course, I'm not here to make fun of Zoomers. I'm much more interested in understanding what really distinguishes millennials from Gen Z and why communication sometimes breaks down between them. Gen Z is often called the whiny generation. Millennials notice something interesting. Young people today seem less stress-resistant and are very sensitive to external triggers. Many have diagnosed mental health issues or openly talk about their emotions, worries, and anxieties. They discuss everything, from global problems to tiny everyday frustrations. Sometimes complaining is just their way of communicating and seeking support. Millennials grew up with a different approach. Don't complain, don't show weakness, just pull yourself together and do it. So when millennials hear a lot about emotions, anxiety, or struggles, it can feel like over-dramatization. Hence all the jokes about the whiny generation. But if you look deeper, it's not about whining. It's about being honest about emotions. What older generations felt silently, Gen Z talks about openly. Another hot topic is work and attitudes toward it. Older generations often say Zoomers are lazy. They think young people don't work hard enough but want high salaries, flexible schedules, vacation, and work-life balance. And yes, Zoomers often won't tolerate an abusive boss. But if you look at it differently, it's not laziness. From a young age, Zoomers were taught to set boundaries. Your comfort matters, your mental health matters, your opinion matters. So it's perfectly normal for them to say, these working conditions don't work for me, and walk away. For older generations, this may feel irresponsible, but for Zoomers, it's just self-care. One more big factor: technology. Gen Z is the first generation literally growing up with smartphones in hand. From childhood, they've been using apps, algorithm delivery services, online platforms. The world works fast for them. Really fast. Click a button, the food arrives. Type a query, you get an answer instantly. Call a ride, the car is already at your door. This shapes a completely different way of interacting with the world. They get used to instant results. Social media, streams, short videos, games, all of this trains their brains to expect fast rewards. So when faced with a task that requires long, repetitive effort, it can feel exhausting. Not because they're lazy, but because their brains are wired for a different rhythm. Another big factor shaping Gen Z is the education system. Many Zoomers grew up learning through remote classes, online courses, 24/7 access to learning materials, flexible deadlines. This creates a different way of working. It's less linear and more targeted. Zoomers often focus on what actually impacts results. Everything else, they see it as a waste of time. For them, it's crucial to understand why I'm doing this, what the purpose, what will I get out of it. If there is no clear purpose, motivation drops sharply. Another important factor is stress fatigue. Zoomers grew up in a very unstable world. Their childhoods and teen years were shaped by financial crisis, a global pandemic, political conflicts, wars, climate anxiety. This creates a very specific psychological background. Many in this generation live with the sense that the world can change dramatically at any moment, and the future feels unpredictable. Now, someone might say, but older generations also went through crisis, and that's true. For example, in the post-Soviet space, people experienced the collapse of the USSR, the chaotic 1990s, economic shocks. All of this shaped their lives. But there is an important difference. It's about psychological context. Older generations grew up in a culture where emotions were rarely discussed. Psychology was often taboo. People were taught to just endure. So yes, they experienced stress, but they didn't label it as an anxiety. Another huge difference is the information environment. Back in the day, people got the news once or twice a day. On TV, in the newspaper, on the radio. Today, news hit us every single minute. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, news feeds. And very often it's about disasters, wars, political conflicts, economic problems. Our brain just can't keep up, which creates a feeling of constant background anxiety. Another factor is constant comparison. Before, people compared themselves to classmates, neighbors, people in their own city. Zoomers, on the other hand, compared themselves to millions of people around the world. On social media, you constantly see other people's success, other people's travel, other people's achievements, other people's perfect lives. And it creates a feeling like everyone else is living better than me. This is sometimes called a 24/7 social mirror. You are always seeing a reflection of others and subconsciously measuring yourself against their standards. By the way, I am a millennial myself. My experience with social media was completely different. I got Instagram when I was around 22. At first it was just a model portfolio. Later I started blogging. Back then there were far fewer content creators. I followed only a small number of people, and honestly my attention was mostly on my own life. I wasn't spending hours scrolling, obsessing over what everyone else was doing. It wasn't until the pandemic, when influencers exploded in number. Then I started observing more of what was happening in that space. But there is a big difference between how social media affects a fully grown adult and how it affects teenagers who are still forming their identities. Another interesting phenomenon which sociologists often talk about is changes in dating and romantic relationships. Here too, the trends are pretty surprising. For example, Gen Z tends to enter romantic life slower than previous generations. Many young people live with their parents longer, focus more on education or career, and spend much of their social life online. As a result, romantic relationships often start later. In the US, for example, roughly 1/3 of young adults aged 18 to 24 at some point report having no romantic relationships at all, a higher number than previous generations. Another interesting trend is that young people today are having less sex. Sociologists even have a term for it: sex recession, a decline in sexual activity. Gen Z tends to have sex less frequently, start sexual life later, have fewer partners. This is actually the first generation in decades to have less sex than their parents did at the same age. There is several possible reasons: social anxiety, living much of life online, pornography dependence, fear of emotional intimacy, greater focus on education and career. For many older generations, this seems kind of paradoxical. After all, the stereotype has long been that each new generation becomes more sexually liberated. But with Gen Z, it's a bit more complicated. Another big topic is loneliness. Even though today's youth have more ways to communicate than ever before, research shows some concerning numbers. About 70% of Gen Z sometimes feel lonely or socially isolated. Roughly 61% of young Americans describe themselves as lonely. Over 55% of Gen Z experience social anxiety in public situations. And here we see a really interesting modern paradox. We have more messages, more chats, more followers, but at the same time we have fewer deep, meaningful connections. Psychologists explain this by pointing out that social skills are only really built offline. This isn't theoretical knowledge. it's practice. It comes from micro-interactions, random conversations, jokes, flirting, shared emotions, arguments, awkward pauses. When people spend a lot of time in a digital environment, the brain gets less practice reading live social cues. Online communication literally cuts out half the information. We don't see facial expressions, tone of voice, body reactions. Because of this, the brain has fewer opportunities to learn how to read people. Psychologists even have a term for it: social skill atrophy. Another interesting phenomenon is so-called controlled communication. Online, you can do things you can't do in real life. Think before you respond, edit your message, choose not to reply, or even just disappear. And this leads to another modern cultural phenomenon: ghosting. Ghosting is when someone suddenly stops all communication without explanation. They just vanish. And that's exactly where the term comes from. Today, this behavior is so common that some people even called it ghosting culture. Another reason dating can be harder is fear of judgment. Social media has created a new psychological reality. Any mistake can go viral, trigger waves of criticism, stay online forever. And this creates a constant background fear. Saying the wrong thing, looking awkward, being judged, becoming a meme. By the way, I heard a really interesting fact. They say Gen Z dances less in clubs compared to previous generations. Instead, they often just stand, sway to the music, or chat. Part of the reason is that people are constantly thinking about how they look from the side or in a video. Today, anyone can pull out their phone, record you, and post it online. For some people, this creates a feeling of constant observation, so they act more reserved. Gen Z, please let me know in the comments, is this true or not? Honestly, I haven't spent much time in clubs myself, so I'm genuinely curious whether this is a myth or real trend. All of this together paints a pretty complex social picture. More technology, more information, more ways to connect, but at the same time more anxiety, more loneliness, and more challenges in real-life social interactions. And this is why understanding generational differences isn't just interest in sociology, it's a tool for better understanding people. When we know the environment in which a generation grew up, the technological and cultural shifts they experienced, it's much easier to understand their behaviors, fears, and values. What seems strange or illogical to one generation can be a completely natural reaction to the reality in which another generation grew up. And when we start seeing this context, a lot of misunderstanding disappear. We start not just judging people, but understanding them. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and we'll see each other again soon. Bye for now.